The emergency HOA meeting convened in the Whitmore's living room at 7 p.m. sharp, with Karen positioned behind her mahogany desk like a general preparing for battle. The other 4 board members, Janet, Bob, Susan, and reluctant treasurer Richard, sat in uncomfortable silence as Karen paced before her evidence board. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are under attack," Karen declared, pointing dramatically at enlarged photos of Mike's pool demolition. "This flagrant disregard for community standards threatens everything we've built here." Janet, ever the loyal lieutenant, nodded vigorously. "The property values, Karen. Think of the property values." "Exactly." Karen slammed her gavel. Yes, she owned an actual gavel on the desk. "We cannot allow this precedent. Today it's pool removal. Tomorrow it's purple houses and rusty car collections." Bob, the newest board member, raised his hand tentatively. "But Karen, you said yourself that the city confirmed he doesn't need our approval for." "The city," Karen interrupted with venom, "doesn't understand the delicate ecosystem of a premium planned community. We do, and I have a plan." She unveiled a 3-pronged attack strategy. First, file noise complaints with the city every day until construction stopped. Second, scrutinize every aspect of Mike's property for any possible violation. And third, implement emergency community standards that would retroactively make his project non-compliant. "That last part sounds legally questionable," Richard muttered, earning a withering glare from his wife. "What sounds questionable?" Karen snapped. "Is allowing chaos to reign in our neighborhood." "Motion to approve the action plan." "Seconded," Janet chirped. The vote was 3-2, with Bob and Richard dissenting. Karen didn't care. She had her mandate. The next morning, Karen began her surveillance campaign. Armed with binoculars, a notebook, and righteous indignation, she documented every truck arrival, every worker break, and every decibel of noise. By noon, she'd filed 3 separate noise complaints with different city departments. But Mike wasn't backing down. When Karen confronted him at the mailbox about excessive dust affecting community air quality, he simply smiled and handed her a business card. "If you have concerns, feel free to call my lawyer," he said pleasantly. The word lawyer sent shockwaves through Karen's system. In 6 years as HOA president, no one had ever threatened legal action against her. Residents complained, grumbled, and occasionally moved away, but they never fought back. That afternoon, Karen received a certified letter that made her blood run cold. Mike's attorney informed the HOA that any harassment, false complaints, or attempts to interfere with legally permitted construction would result in a lawsuit for damages and harassment. "He can't do that," Karen shrieked at Richard, waving the letter like a weapon. "Actually, honey, I think he can," Richard replied, loosening his tie after another long day of apologizing to neighbors for his wife's behavior. But Karen Whitmore had never retreated from a fight in her life. If Mike wanted to escalate, she'd show him what real escalation looked like. She spent the evening researching property law, homeowner rights, and legal precedents. By midnight, she'd crafted her masterpiece, a formal complaint to the city alleging safety violations, environmental hazards, and public nuisance. She'd also begun drafting new community standards that would be voted on at next month's general meeting. What Karen didn't realize was that her war on Mike had already claimed its first casualty, her own reputation. Neighbors were beginning to whisper, phone calls were being made, and a quiet rebellion was brewing in the perfectly manicured streets of Willowbrook Estates. The jackhammer would resume tomorrow, and so would Karen's campaign. But she was about to discover that some battles can't be won through sheer force of will and an endless supply of laminated documents. The special board meeting convened at 7 p.m. in the community center, but Karen arrived to find the room packed with residents she'd spent years alienating. Faces that had once shown resignation or fear now displayed something far worse, pity mixed with determination. Janet, her former loyal lieutenant, avoided eye contact as she read from a prepared statement. "Based on recent events that have brought negative attention to our community and exposed the HOA to potential legal liability, the board has voted to remove Karen Whitmore from her position as president, effective immediately. The motion passed 4-0. Even Richard abstained rather than support her. Karen stood slowly, her hands shaking as she gathered her files. You're all making a mistake. Without strong leadership, this community will fall apart. Karen, said Bob, speaking gently, the community was falling apart because of the leadership we had. The words hit harder than any legal threat. Karen walked out of the community center into the humid evening air, past neighbors who'd once scurried to avoid her disapproval, now chatting casually in the parking lot. At home, she found Richard in his study, boxing up her HOA materials. The new president will pick these up tomorrow, he said without looking up. New president? Mike Chen. Unanimous vote. The irony was exquisite and crushing. The man she tried to destroy was now inheriting the position she'd fought so hard to keep. Karen spent the next 3 days in a haze of humiliation and self-reflection. She avoided the windows facing Mike's yard, couldn't bring herself to check the mailbox, and found herself jumping at every unfamiliar sound. On Sunday morning, the doorbell rang. Karen ignored it, but Richard answered, and she heard Mike's voice in the hallway. Is Karen available? I'd like to speak with her. She considered hiding, but something in his tone, not triumph, not mockery, but genuine concern, made her walk to the front door. Mike stood on her porch holding a covered dish, and wearing the same patient expression he'd shown throughout their entire conflict. I brought you some of my wife's famous lasagna, he said. Thought you might be having a rough week. Karen stared at the dish, then at Mike's kind face, and felt something crack inside her chest. Why? She whispered. Because you're my neighbor, Karen, and neighbors look out for each other, even when they disagree. She accepted the lasagna with trembling hands. I'm sorry, Mike. I'm so sorry for everything. I know you are, and I accept your apology. They stood in awkward silence for a moment before Mike continued. The new HOA board is meeting Tuesday night. We could use your experience, if you're interested in helping instead of controlling. Karen almost laughed at the impossibility of it. You want me on the board, after everything I did? You know this community better than anyone. You care about it, maybe too much sometimes, but you care. That passion could be an asset if it's channeled properly. After Mike left, Karen sat in her kitchen with the still warm lasagna, processing the most unexpected gift she'd ever received. Forgiveness she didn't deserve, and a second chance she'd never thought to ask for. But that evening, as she watched Mike's family gathering in their newly spacious backyard, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. A moving truck was parked 3 houses down at the Patterson residence, and Mrs. Patterson was directing movers with obvious urgency. Karen grabbed her binoculars, old habits die hard, and focused on the scene. Mrs. Patterson kept glancing nervously toward Mike's house, and when she spotted Karen watching, she quickly looked away. Something wasn't right in Willowbrook Estates, and for the first time in days, Karen felt the familiar tingle of a mystery that needed solving. But this time, she'd have to investigate as just another neighbor, not the all-powerful HOA president. The question was, could a reformed Karen Whitmore solve problems without creating bigger ones in the process? Karen Whitmore's morning coffee went flying across her pristine granite countertop as the jackhammer's thunderous roar shattered the suburban silence at precisely 7:00 a.m. Through her kitchen window, she watched in horror as chunks of concrete sailed through the air from her neighbor Mike's backyard, one piece landing squarely on her prize-winning hydrangeas. What the hell is going on over here? She shrieked, her voice cutting through the construction noise like a banshee's wail. The jackhammer stopped. Mike Chen appeared at the fence line, safety goggles pushed up on his forehead, looking genuinely apologetic. Morning, Karen. Sorry about the noise. I'm removing the old pool. Got all the permits and everything. Started early to beat the heat. Karen's eye twitched, the same twitched that had terrorized countless delivery drivers and landscapers. Permits? Permits? Did you get HOA approval? Because Section 4.7 of our community guidelines clearly states. Actually, I checked with the city. Mike interrupted, wiping sweat from his brow. Pool removal doesn't require HOA approval since it's not adding anything to the property. The words hit Karen like a slap. She'd been HOA president for 6 years, ruling Willowbrook Estates with an iron fist and a laminated copy of the community bylaws. The idea that someone could make a major property change without her approval was unthinkable. "We'll see about that," she muttered, already reaching for her phone. By 8:30 am, Karen had made 7 phone calls. City planning confirmed Mike was right. That HOA's legal advisor, a tired-sounding man named Bob, explained that pools fell under city jurisdiction, not community oversight. Even her friend Janet at the county clerk's office had nothing helpful to offer. But Karen Whitmore didn't become the most feared resident of Willowbrook Estates by accepting defeat. If Mike thought he could circumvent her authority, he was about to learn otherwise. She marched to her home office, a shrine to bureaucratic power complete with filing cabinets, organized by complaint type, and a wall of framed certificates from various homeowner association conferences. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she composed an email to the entire HOA board. "Emergency meeting tonight," she typed. "Neighbor violation in progress. Community standards at risk." The jackhammer resumed its assault on concrete, and Karen's jaw clenched with each thunderous crack. She pulled out her phone and began recording video through the window, muttering commentary about property value destruction and noise violations. What Karen didn't notice was her husband Richard watching from the doorway, shaking his head with a mixture of embarrassment and resignation. After 23 years of marriage, he knew that look in her eyes. Someone was about to have their life turned upside down, and unfortunately, that someone was usually him too. The war for Willowbrook Estates had begun, and Karen Whitmore was loading her weapons. Karen's world began cracking like Mike's demolished pool concrete when the doorbell rang at 6:47 am on Thursday morning. Through the peephole, she saw a young woman in a business suit holding an official-looking folder. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Sarah Chen, Mike's daughter and his attorney. We need to talk." The revelation hit Karen like ice water. Mike wasn't just some random neighbor. He was the father of one of the city's most promising young lawyers, and Karen had just declared war on the wrong family. "I don't have time for," Karen began, but Sarah's interruption was surgical in its precision. "Harassment, filing false reports, trespassing on my father's property to take photographs, and now I'm hearing about attempted intimidation of construction workers. Would you like to continue this conversation on your doorstep, or shall we step inside?" 15 minutes later, Karen sat across from Sarah in her own living room, feeling smaller than she had in decades. The young lawyer laid out a timeline of Karen's actions with courtroom efficiency, complete with timestamps, witness statements, and documented evidence. "Your surveillance activities crossed into stalking 2 days ago," Sarah explained calmly. "The false noise complaints have wasted city resources and constitute filing false reports. And according to Mrs. Patterson next door, you've been pressuring neighbors to sign a petition against my father based on fabricated safety concerns." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "I'm protecting this community. I'm the HOA president." "Being HOA president doesn't grant you law enforcement powers, Mrs. Whitmore. It certainly doesn't allow you to harass private citizens engaged in legal activities." The coup de grace came when Sarah produced her phone and played a recording. Karen's own voice filled the room, captured during yesterday's confrontation at the fence line. "I don't care what the city says. I run this neighborhood, and I'll make your life hell until you stop this project." "Harassment and intimidation," recorded by a witness, Sarah noted. "Now here's what's going to happen." The terms were non-negotiable. Karen would cease all surveillance activities, stop filing complaints, and issue a written apology to Mike and the construction crew. Any further harassment would result in immediate legal action, including restraining orders and a lawsuit for damages. "You can't do this to me," Karen whispered, her voice cracking. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm doing this for you. My father wanted to file charges yesterday. I convinced him to give you one chance to resolve this quietly." After Sarah left, Karen sat in her pristine living room, surrounded by her certificates and awards, Feeling the walls of her carefully constructed authority crumbling around her, the jackhammer resumed its work next door, each blow now sounding like the drumbeat of her defeat. But the real devastation was yet to come. At 2 p.m., her phone rang. "Karen, it's Janet. We need to talk. Susan, Bob, and I have been discussing your recent behavior. There's going to be a special board meeting tonight about your position as president." The mutiny she never saw coming had arrived. Her own supporters, embarrassed by the legal threats and neighborhood gossip, were preparing to remove her from power. Karen hung up the phone and walked to her kitchen window, where Mike was visible in his backyard, directing the cleanup of the demolished pool. He looked up, caught her watching, and did something that broke her heart. He waved, not mockingly or triumphantly, but with the simple, neighborly gesture of someone who bore no grudges. For the first time in 6 years, Karen Whitmore began to question whether being feared was worth being utterly, completely alone.